What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with Judeo-Christian values and real-world, first-hand experience. Today we're going to get really nerdy and in-depth on shotguns. We're going to talk about one aspect of shotguns, and if you guys like it, we'll get into a series. Now, we've talked about shotguns before, obviously. We're going to get in-depth into the nitty-gritty. Hopefully it's not too nerdy for you guys. But if you're like me, you like the nerdy aspects of gun stuff and gun culture and things like that. Before we get into today's topic, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review. If you want to check out stuff while you're listening, go to goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, I will plug in the bio. If you want to skip it, skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds. If you've heard it before, don't want to listen, no worries. I'll catch you in a few minutes. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a three-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals, and I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other three-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic. Alright, men, let's get nerdy on shotguns. Like I said, hopefully you guys like this. If you do, reach out and let me know. Easiest way is a review on the podcast. You scroll down whatever thing you're listening to it on and leave a review. But a little preamble on the episode. One reason I talk about shotguns so much is not because they're my favorite or the coolest guns. I have competed in shotgun, but I've done much, much more competing in handgun. And I got into handgun competitions. I started out in precision rifle, but I got out into handguns because I was a police officer at the time, and I thought I should be good with the weapon that I was most likely to have to use. And as an armed citizen, as a concealed carrier, you should be good with a handgun. And a handgun is the hardest gun to master. It is the hardest gun to shoot well. It's one of the things I love about it. But often as a police officer or as a citizen for home defense, I don't want the handgun if I know that I'm going to get into a gunfight. Hopefully I can avoid the gunfight. I don't want to be in one. But if I can't in a lot of situations, the go-to is the shotgun. Why? Because it is so intuitive, because it is so easy to use. And here's the other thing. If you're into being ready, if you're a man that thinks he ought to be able to defend and provide for himself and those around him, think about how many violent confrontations you've been in, and then think about how many times you've had to eat in your life. The number of times you had to eat far outweighs the number of violent confrontations you've been in. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a Navy SEAL. That still holds true. And I'm of the opinion, having hunted since I was a young boy, the best firearm, the best weapon to put food on the table in all kinds of different circumstances is the shotgun. Anything from a mourning dove, anything from a Tweety bird to a grizzly bear. In fact, a lot of grizzly bear guides, people that go into grizzly bear country, use a 12-gauge shotgun with slugs. And just because of the versatility of the weapon, you can take anything from a Tweety bird to a grizzly bear with the same weapon, with just switching out shotgun shells. There's really no other weapon that versatile. And that's why we talk a lot about the shotgun here. Today we're going to talk about the types of shotguns. There's a lot of new shooters in the world of shooting, especially in the last decade since I've been a professional firearms instructor. I've seen a lot of change in the gun culture, and I think that's fantastic. But I think there's something to be gleaned and learned from, the gun culture of yesteryear. And I think a lot of the new gun culture is all polymer, plastic, fantastic 9mm and AR-15s. And those are great. I love those. We do a lot of shows on those. But there's a bigger world out there. So if that's mostly what you know, this podcast hopefully is for you. And if you already know a lot about shotguns, hopefully you learn a little bit more, or you just like hearing it again. But let's start out with your most basic type of shotgun, and that's going to be your break action single shot. Break action single shot. Now, break action means that it pretty much breaks in the middle, not exactly in the middle, but it breaks where the stock and the barrel join. A very simple operating system, very simple mechanically. There's a lever of some kind. Sometimes it's a trigger guard. Sometimes it's a lever on the back, especially on your more classic guns that you push to one side or the other. And the action splits open. And you put a shell in. A shotgun shell. We'll get into the differences in shells and stuff in a little bit. But you put the shell in. And you close the action. That's your break action single shot. Very simple. A lot of them have hammers. In fact, I think most of them probably have hammers. So what are some of the advantages of the break action single shot? Well, a big one is simplicity. They are very simple to operate. They're very simple to maintain. They're generally very robust. You don't get a lot of problems generally with a break action single shot. So that's a big one. I like simple. Simple a lot of times is better, especially when you're talking about a hard time hunting tool. Another big advantage is they're pretty light.
since you get rid of the entire space of the action needing to load and unload shells, since you do it manually by placing them in there, with a similar barrel length, your break action guns are going to be quite a bit shorter than your pumps and semi-autos, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But let's say more compact and generally pretty lightweight for what you get. So that's another advantage of the break action single shot. So they're simple, they're lightweight. Like I said, a lot of them have a hammer. So if you're training somebody or a new shooter, they're very easy as an instructor, because if I tell them to carry it with the action open, then I can look and very easily see that shotgun's broken in half. It's not able to be fired. I can very easily look and see if it's open, if there's a shell in there or not. And even when they close it, I can very easily look and see if the hammer is back or not. So again, as an instructor, as a teacher, very inherently safe. Also for you in the field, if you're crawling in and out of brush, over barbed wire fences, whatever it is, things like that, climbing a tree, you can break it open. And it's open and it's unloaded and it's very, very safe. It's no more dangerous than a baseball bat at that point. So that's another big advantage. Let's talk about another big advantage, which is cost. I have one break action single shot. I grew up hunting with one. It's kind of the poor man's all around hunting tool because they're affordable, and they still are. Even in the midst of COVID and inflation and all that stuff, I went and got one at Walmart, brand new, a Hatfield, for just over $100. And there were some tax and stuff involved, but I want to say out the door it was like under $120 or $120 something dollars. But that's, if you think about a tool that can take anything from a chipmunk to a grizzly bear for $120-ish, let's call it $120. The value, it's probably, well, I guess it is probably the most affordable gun, because even a high point pistol is going to cost more than that. It is a very affordable gun. Simple, effective, affordable. In fact, thinking about that, a lot of optics, even, budget optics you're going to put it on an AR, cost more than the entire shotgun. And they're way less versatile than the shotgun. So if you have a couple of black rifles, a couple of, handguns, and you're looking at building out your arsenal, this would be a great way to go. And if it's your first gun, it's really a good way to go. Now, what are some of the disadvantages of the break action single shot? The BASS. The break action single shot, as the name implies, is a single shot. Now, if you practice a lot, you can get fairly decent at reloading them quickly. But obviously, your big disadvantage is going to be rate of fire. Rate of fire is what it is. It's a single shot. It's a great tool for hunting. It's a great tool for learning to hunt. It is certainly much better than having no weapon. But for any kind of defensive use, I would consider it not a go-to for that, because it is a single shot. And, a single shot of double-up buck, if you have a well-placed shot, will pretty much end any attacker. But especially in today's world, what if you have 2 or 3 attackers? So that's a big disadvantage to the break action single shot. And really the only big disadvantage is the rate of fire. Next, let's get into the world of double guns. The classic side-by-side shotgun. Beautiful, hunting implement. Been used in the field for hundreds of years. They come in 2 different varieties. The most classic one you're probably going to think of is the side-by-side. It's the classic, English hunting pheasants. Classic side-by-side shotgun. They're beautiful. They're elegant. And then your other flavor is going to be the over and under. Sometime in the last century, 100 years or so, the over and under really took over, especially in competition and in a lot of bird hunting and upland hunting as well. But as the name implies, a side-by-side, the barrels are beside each other, and an over and under, one barrel is under the other. Now, the big advantage to this, especially over the single shot, is you get 2 shots. And you get 2 shots very quickly. There's not even any action to cycle. Both rounds are ready to go. So you get literally twice the amount of firepower. You get 2 shots. Another big advantage of this type, even over, like let's say a semi-auto that can hold a ton of rounds, is that you can have 2 completely different rounds ready to go simultaneously. So a lot of times when I was in Idaho and I would go out scouting, I would take a double barrel shotgun for this very reason. Because I might see a deer, I might see a grouse, and I could have one barrel loaded up with double-aught buck, and I could have one barrel loaded up with, birdshot, your classic, number 6 shot or 7.5 shot. And I could have a variety of shells on me. And if I was in some dark timber, who knows what I was going to see? I could stumble across a bear that needed, to be defended against. Or I could come across something delicious for dinner that was smaller. So that's a big, big advantage. So you can have 2 different kind of shells ready to go. And we'll get into all the differences of shotgun shells and things later, different gauges. All that's coming if you guys like this in-depth content. All that's coming. But know that you can have 2 very different purpose ammunitions ready to go on tap. So they have that. And we'll get into chokes later. But choke, unlike pretty much any other gun, a choke is something unique to shotguns. And it constricts the shot, which is all the pellets that leave the barrel of varying sizes and varying different arrays. But just know that there's different constrictions that come into play at different yardages. If you're shooting small doves and things very close, you want a fairly open choke. And if you want to shoot things farther away, in general, you constrict that choke. Like let's say you're trying to shoot geese at a far distance with, quite a bit larger shot. You're going to use a different kind of choke for that. And again, getting back to the double guns, the side-by-sides, the over and under, you can have 2 different chokes ready to go. And without getting into all the names of chokes and everything, you can have one barrel ready to go for an animal that jumps up real close and another set up for an animal that's farther away. So let's say you're hunting quail, with dogs, which is a fairly common shotgunning thing. You're walking through a field and you jump a bunch of quail and you shoot one when it jumps up right in front of you. And then the other quail are probably going to be farther away because they're flying away from you. So you can have 2 different barrels ready to go with 2 different kind of chokes for 2 different distances. And again, that's unique to the double gun. So there's some advantages there, and that's a big reason they're still used a lot in sporting, in bird hunting, and rabbit hunting, and all kinds of hunting. It's a big reason that they're good for that. The big disadvantage is cost. In general, double guns are the most expensive that we're going to talk about today for a decent double gun. Some double guns cost as much as a house or a car. And if you want to talk about really fine, beautiful, like English double guns. But that's probably not what most of you are thinking about. But to get a good quality shotgun, over and under, double, Beretta, things like that, you're talking quite a big investment. So that's the big disadvantage there. They generally cost quite a bit of money. Now you can find some deals out there and things like that. Another disadvantage is if you ever take one apart, they're very complex inside. You would think that they're maybe simpler than an autoloader, but I really don't think that they are, having worked on both. They're quite complex. Again, they're kind of like a Swiss watch inside, all of these little intricate parts working together. Maybe even one trigger working 2 different barrels and 2 different things, and switches to switch back and forth. They're quite complex. One of the reasons they can be so expensive. But that being said, because they are pretty expensive and because they've been made for hundreds of years, they tend to be pretty reliable. And if one barrel stops working or something breaks inside it, generally the other barrel might still work. So there's your advantages and disadvantages of the double gun. For defensive purposes, twice as good as a single shot because you have two shots. So if you have 2 attackers, again, if you have a decent, well-placed shot with a good load of double-aught buck, and we'll get into shot sizes later, that's probably all you're going to need on one attacker. And if you have 2 barrels ready to go, that's probably all you need for 2 attackers. But what if there's multiple? They're still need to be broken open and manually reloaded. So there's your advantages and disadvantages there. They really shine in competition and like things like sporting clays and, skeet shooting. They really shine there, and they really still shine in the field because of that versatility and having different kinds of ammo and different chokes ready to go on tap. Now, let's talk about the pump shotgun. What we think of as kind of the quintessential American hunting tool, great for waterfowl hunting, great for a lot of things. The pump action, the slide action, trombone action, whatever you want to call it. The pump action shotgun. They've been made for a long, long time. The earliest ones came out in the 1800s, but they really are kind of the epitome of the working man's shotgun. And they have been for, you kind of think of them that way in the 20th century, the working man's shotgun. Something the everyman could afford, that gave a reasonable rate of fire to let him go into the field and feed his family on quail, on deer, on any number of game animals. Whether that was the Winchester Model 12 or later the 1200, or the Remington 870, which is just an icon. We've done an entire episode on the 870, and the Mossbergs of different flavors, whether that be the Mossberg 500, the 590, the Maverick 88, your classic pump action shotguns. What are the big advantages of the pump action shotgun? Well, a big one is they are generally built like tanks. They are built to hunt for generations in some of the nastiest, grossest environments, used as canoe paddles, dropped out of duck blinds into salt water, in the mud, in the snow, and just keep on going. They're think of them, if you're in the tactical world, as the AKs of the shotgun world. They have a reputation for just going and going and going, and just continuing to function with abuse, with really, really harsh environments. And if you're into survival, you can see why that might appeal to you. They're also very mechanically simple. Perhaps not as simple as a break action single shot, but they've whittled it down to pretty simple, functioning, robust guns. And if you go with a well-proven one like an older 870 or any of the Mossbergs, they just run, and they have very little issues. I mean, all mechanical things can jam and have issues and things like that. But pumps, again, they have a reputation for being robust and, forgiving of neglect, easy to work on, big moving parts, big tolerances. So that's a big advantage. The next big advantage to the pump gun is value. We talked about the break action single shot, and I don't know when you're going to listen to this. You could listen to this in a year and inflation could have doubled and all these prices could be out the window and have doubled. But at the time of this recording, let's say that let's make up our own just post-apocalyptic currency just for the fun of it, because I don't know when you're going to listen to this. Let's say jars of peanut butter is the new currency. And, it takes 50 jars of peanut butter to buy a break action single shot. In today's money, that would be $100, $120, depending on where you get peanut butter, which would be about right. So if it takes 50 jars of peanut butter to buy a break action single shot, it would generally take around 100 jars to buy a decent, reliable pump action shotgun. So you're looking at double the cost, but still not outrageously expensive. But you get a good rate of fire. Most just your standard field hunting, not tactical shotguns, but just most of your standard pump shotguns are going to be 5 shots. So you get 5 shots on tap. And if you know how to run a pump gun, you can run them pretty fast. So you get a good rate of fire for 5 shots. You can get mag tubes and extensions, and some come with 7 shots or 9 shots. But anywhere in there, even your basic 5-shot model is, again, 5 times more than your break action single shot. And you don't have to break it open and insert a shell and close it and cock the hammer. You literally just have to run a pump. And if you know what you're doing, a lot of times that starts to happen during recoil anyway, and you have to reacquire your sight picture. So for practical purposes, they're fast. To tell you how fast, a lot of really good shooters and exhibition shooters of yesteryear can take multiple clays in one hand, throw them in the air. A clay is like a small ceramic plate that you shoot out of the air, if you don't know that. But they would grab several of these and throw them in the air and then grab the shotgun and shoot the clays out of the air before they hit the ground while still pumping the shotgun to let you know how fast they can be operated. So they're a tremendous value. They give you a good rate of fire. They're simple. They tend to work reliably even in harsh environments. So what's the disadvantage? The disadvantage is they need both hands to operate, so you can't fire them one-handed. You need both hands to operate them, at least if you're going to fire more than one shot. So that's a disadvantage. Another big disadvantage to the pump is, and I've seen this in training, I've been a professional firearms instructor a long time, is not that the gun is not reliable, but that people under stress or trying to go really fast, or for any number of reasons, they're running, they're moving, you can cause a lot of malfunctions by user error because you have to fully run the pump back and fully run it forward for the gun to work. And it's a simple operation, and the guns are very reliable, but people are not always as reliable. So people say that pump guns don't jam. Well, the gun may not jam very often, and they do jam. Any mechanical thing can jam. But they may not jam that often, but people can jam and buckle under pressure. So just know that that's a thing that does happen. Just because the weapon itself is reliable doesn't mean that people always use it as reliably. Next, we'll get into the last one, the semi-automatic. Now, the semi-automatic is just like your AR-15 that's semi-automatic, or just like your Glock that's semi-automatic. You pull the trigger, gun goes off, cycles itself, it's ready to go again. You pull the trigger again, and it goes off again. Theoretically, unless the gun jams, it does that until it's out of ammunition. The semi-automatic. The big advantage here, as you might imagine, is rate of fire. It is the fastest. I don't care what anybody said, it is the fastest. You can run a pump gun very fast, but if you don't have to pump it, you can run faster. It is the fastest. Also, a big advantage, shotguns, especially 12 gauges, have quite a bit of recoil. And since some of that recoil is used to cycle the action, it reduces a little bit of that recoil. And that is a much bigger advantage, I think, than a lot of men that tout themselves as being big and burly like to admit. I was sighting in a shotgun the other day with slugs, and at the end of that session, my shoulder hurt. It hurt the rest of the night. It was a pump gun. Semi-autos, again, will reduce some of that recoil. That's a big advantage in my opinion. So faster rate of fire. Also, a big advantage is that there's really no, well, I guess there's always some user. You could load the gun wrong. You could load a shell in backwards or something crazy. But assuming the gun works, if you just pull the trigger, the gun does all the work. So it takes out that propensity for human error. So that's not a concern. So what are the big disadvantages? Well, the biggest disadvantage is cost. There are cheaper and cheaper semi-automatics being made. But in general, if you want a good semi-automatic, one as mechanically reliable as that pump gun you were looking at, it's going to set you back quite a few jars of peanut butter. Whereas that pump might set you back 100 jars of peanut butter, that good, reliable semi-automatic might set you back 200 or 300 jars of peanut butter, or maybe more. If we're talking about a really good Benelli Beretta, which is what I consider the top two, really good semi-automatics. And there are some cheaper ones, but you're looking at spending quite a bit more peanut butter for a little bit faster rate of fire. So I think the value goes to the pump. If you want, you can get a semi-auto as reliable or even more reliable than any pump gun, in my opinion, because you eliminate that human error. And people might think they're complicated, but remember, a AK-47 is a semi-automatic, or I guess a true AK-47 is an automatic. It cycles itself, and it basically uses a bolt and a spring and a piston. Pretty simple. Nobody would say that that is too complicated to be reliable, I don't think. And most of your modern semi-automatic shotguns, if they're gas operated, guess what? They have a big spring and a piston and a bolt. And the Benellis that I like, they're inertia driven. They basically just use the recoil to rotate a bolt and push a spring back and forth. So they're not overly complicated. And if you make them out of good quality parts, they are very, very reliable. And I think I'll buck the tradition of most tactical shooters. And I love, pump shotguns. I love semi-autos. But I think if you spend the money, you can get a more reliable system out of a semi-auto again because you take out that human element. And you could say, I'm going to train and I'm going to run it perfect. And you might on a good static range or in a training class. What about when you've lost a bunch of blood or you've been in a fight and your hands have been smashed or whatever? Another big advantage to the semi-auto is you can run it one-handed. If you're strong enough to hold it up to your shoulder one-handed, you're grabbing a child or pushing somebody out of the way or whatever, you can fire that gun repeatedly with one hand in your shoulder. That's a big advantage. Another disadvantage, which is kind of unique to the semi-auto, is just like semi-auto rifles and pistols, you need the ammunition to cycle the firearm. So unless you get a really good semi-auto like we're talking about, Beretta, Benellis generally don't have any of these problems. But a lot of shotguns have a hard time, semi-autos I'm talking, going back and forth between the lightest field loads to the super heavy magnum loads because there's such a variance in the power level. And some of the less expensive, let's say, semi-auto defensive guns may work great with defensive loads, but not great for field loads. And one of the big advantages to me of the shotgun is the versatility. That would be considered a disadvantage in that it takes the power of the round to cycle the shotgun. So there we go on the pros and cons of the different kinds of actions. I will throw in there bolt action shotguns. You don't see them much anymore. You don't really see them being made unless it's like a specialty slug gun, which we might talk about in some episode. But general purpose shotguns, I actually grew up, my very first gun that was ever mine was given to me by my uncle, and it was a bolt action 410 Mossberg. Great gun. Another story for another day, but restored that with my nephew and passed it down to him. But they are still out there. You can still find them at gun shows, and they're kind of an ugly duckling, so they're not really coveted. You can sometimes pick them up for a few jars of peanut butter, and they might be beat up, and they were probably hunted with hard if they were used. That's what they were made for. But think of them as a little bit slower than a pump gun, but they give you a reasonable rate of fire. For hunting game in the bush, they're just fine. They're plenty fast enough rate of fire-wise. If you can find one for a good deal, think about what I said about the pump gun. If you're familiar with bolt action rifles, kind of the same thing. They're simple. A lot of times they're box fed, which that's kind of cool on its own because you can take out, if they come with multiple box magazines, you could take out a box of one kind of magazine and insert another. Sometimes they have fixed box magazines, and some of them are so old the box magazine springs may have problems and feeding problems. But when you get that shell in the chamber, generally it's good to go. So just know they're kind of a novelty, but they are still out there. If you could get one that works for the same cost as a break action single shot, it does give you a little bit more reasonable rate of fire. With that, I hope you have been with me and not glazed over in this nerdy episode about shotguns. And again, if you like it, this will be hopefully one of a series. I won't do them back to back to back because maybe you're just not a shotgun person. Maybe I'll do one of these every week or couple of weeks and get back into the ARs and the Glocks that everybody loves and the tactical stuff and all those things. Tactical tip of the day. It's going to be on shotguns, surprise, surprise. But most of the shotguns you get, especially from years past, unless it's a tactical shotgun with ghost ring sights or something, most of them they're going to have what's called a bead sight. A lot of them will have a rail and a bead sight, which we'll get into in another episode. But if you have just a plain metal bead sight, you might really want to consider just getting a fiber optic sight. A lot of times they have them that clamp right onto the barrel if it's a round barrel, or if it clips right onto the rail if it's a fairly common rail size. They're not very expensive, and just the light gathering ability and the ability to pick up that sight in the field or even in a tactical scenario, I think is well worth the little bit of money that it costs. And if you can't do either one of those, take that regular brass bead sight or steel bead sight and take some obnoxiously bright colored nail polish and paint it bright yellow, bright green, bright orange, whatever. You're talking basically nothing. Usually get some really bright, ugly nail polish for $1 or $2. If you want to spend a few dollars, get one of the fiber optic. They really are a big advantage, I think, in the field. Picking up sights, especially in the forest, in the shade, and low light. So that's your tactical tip of the day. If you thought that tip or any of the information was worth $1, a fraction of the cost of a box of ammo or more, consider going to Patreon. You can get there, again, goodshepherdtraining.com. Go directly to Patreon and type in this podcast, but just go to goodshepherdtraining.com. There's a link right on there. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, because that way when we do part 2 or part 3 or whatever, then you'll get a notification. It'll automatically download. You won't forget about it. So if you haven't already subscribed, go down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future content. If you like this content, you can scroll back. There's quite a few on this podcast and also the Alpha Male podcast. If you're not familiar with that podcast, we do quite a few episodes on shotguns. And that's going to bring us to the tactical verse of the day. Tactical verse of the day is going to be from Proverbs 23. Do not let your heart envy sinners, but be zealous for the fear of the Lord all the day. For surely there is a hereafter, and your hope will not be cut off. Hear, my son, and be wise, and guide your heart in the way. Do not mix with winebibbers, or with gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags. So if you got nothing out of this episode about shotguns, you got some wisdom and truth there. Every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. And God's not going to be impressed with how cool your gun collection is. So give some thought to what really matters in life. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.